Let's go over that little 5-question quiz we had recently. First problem, Jimmy bought a set of tools for $14.39. He also has to pay sales tax of 7.3%. The popular way to do that is to change 7.3% to a decimal, which is 0.073. The zero to the left of the point, you don't have to have it mathematically. I like to put it there because it calls your attention to the decimal point. And if you do that, you can check it with your calculator. You get 105.047. Now it's money. It doesn't say where to round it. And in my class, if it's money and I don't tell you to round it to the nearest something, you always round it to the nearest penny. If you decide to round it to the nearest dollar instead, it will be marked wrong for this problem. So then I add the 105.05 to the 1439 cost of the tools, and we get $1,544.05. Now, that's the popular way. Calculate the tax and add it on. The cool way is to recognize that adding 7.3% of a number to the number results in 107.3% of that number. So 107.3% is 1.073. And if you multiply that by the set of tools before tax, you immediately get the answer to the problem, except you have to round it off 1544.05 because the 7 is 5 or more. It's big enough to bump it up to a 5. If the 7 was a 0, 1, 2, 3, or 4, then you would just leave it 0.04. And that is the only answer that would get this problem right. If you round it off to something else, no dice. So this pool hall price of $439,920 includes 6% tax. Do not take 6% of $439,920 and subtract it off because that's not what the tax is based on. The tax is already in there. And you can't take 6% of the number before tax until you know what it is. But you do know that when you take the unknown price of the pool hall and increase it by 6% of itself, that's the same thing as 106% of that number. So you have to know how to do this by dividing. That's the only way to do it. It's 106% of the unknown price. So you divide the $439,920 by 1.06. You wind up with $415,018.867. If you round that off to 0.87, I'm going to mark it wrong because it says to the nearest dollar. And I'm not going to put that in red to call your attention to it. You've got to read the problem, hopefully more than once. So the only answer that was marked correct for this one is $415,019. That's it. All right. Sometimes items that you buy go up or down in price. It's called the percent increase or decrease. I call it the percent change. It's the difference divided by the old price, not the big one, not the little one, but the old one. In this case, price goes down from 1090 to 680. So you subtract, you get 410, you divide that by 1090, you get 0.3761. Again, verify that with your calculator. Change it to a percent by moving the point 2 places to the right. You get 37.61%, but it says round to the nearest 0.1%. That's not the same thing as the nearest 0.1. The nearest 0.1 would be 0.4. That's the nearest 0.1. The nearest 0.1% means change that to a percent first, and then give me 0.1%. That's where the 6 is. If I wanted 0.01%, that would be where the 1 is. So it's either 37.6 or 37.7%. And obviously 1 is not big enough to bump it up. Here we are making sausage again. Okay. And Spike has 120 pounds of venison. And the recipe is 40% pork, 20% beef, and the rest. Well, the rest is the other 120 pounds. Percentage-wise, the rest is 100% of the total meat minus the total percent of the pork and the beef, which is 60%. So that happens to be 40%, the same as pork, incidentally. So 120 pounds of venison is 40% or 0.40. Or you could just say 0.4, doesn't matter, of the total weight. So that means 120 pounds is 40% of something. So 40% times what gives you 120, and the answer is 120 divided by 0.4. And yes, the answer gets bigger because when you divide by a number between 0 and 1, the answer always gets bigger. We can talk about why another time. The question is not how much is the total weight of 300. The question is how much beef? Oh, and since the beef is 20% of the total weight, you just take the total weight of 300 pounds, multiply it by 20%, which is 0.2, and you get 60 pounds. Same as the venison. All right, we have this problem a few times, and you don't know the sticker price, you know the drive-out price. And in that case, what I recommend you do is 3 steps. Subtract the fees. Well, the fees are 205.70. So subtract that from 15,800. And then divide that by 1 point the tax rate. Because why? Well, when you subtract that, and you can verify again on your calculator, you get $15,594.30. That's 3 dimes, which is the same thing as 30 cents. You divide it by 1 point the tax rate. And then that answer, let's look at this on the calculator. 155.94.3. Now I'm going to look at it. Is that right? 15594. Yeah, that's right. I'm going to divide that by 1.065. And that turns out to be that ridiculous number, which you could round off to 54 cents if you wanted to, but you don't have to. You can just divide that by 0.9 because that's 90%. It's 10% off, which means it's 90% still there. Divide it by 0.9, and you get 16269.483. The 3 is not big enough. So why do I round it off to the nearest penny? Because it's money, and it doesn't say how to round it off. And again, in this class, if it's money and you have no round off instructions like the nearest dollar or the nearest $100, then you're going to get it wrong if you have anything but round it to the nearest penny. And if I ask you to round something to the nearest dollar and you don't do it, you leave it at the nearest penny, that will be marked wrong. Follow the directions. Remember, read the problem, work the problem, read the problem again, and pay attention to the round off instructions if there are any. And if there are not any, it's money, you round it off to the nearest penny. If I ask you to round it off to the nearest dollar or $100, then that's what you do.